My name is Holmen. I'm the founder and CEO of Bibblio. And Bibblio is a content recommendation engine. But we are a B2B company, so we work with publishers and media companies. And essentially, what we do is when the page loads, the article loads, we basically decide on what other articles around the content to recommend to people. So think of sort of related articles, popular articles. We basically populate those widgets on the page, and we make that decision on behalf of the publishers. So they can sort of outsource that piece of their technology to Bibblio. So obviously that is, we do AI. We basically have a bunch of algorithms who try to find out what content to show to people to maximize engagement and to maximize revenue. So when the user lands on the page, we've done a reading of this. So we use both natural language processing to understand the article itself and find other related articles. But we also look at all the user behavior to basically try to optimize that data. So really we rely on a lot of data around the content itself and around the usage of that content to actually drive better recommendations. So you could say Bibblio at heart is a big data and AI company. It's what we do for people in a way. And we mean working with Bibblio means that you don't have to do a bunch of that stuff yourself in-house. So you can focus your development resources on things that we think are more important to you. So yes, there's kind of three stages almost. The first stage of data is where you have, say, tags. And so this article is tagged with Donald Trump, and this article is tagged with Donald Trump. And so we know that we could recommend this article as a related article to the article that you're reading. Except that data doesn't change. Once we've added tags to a page, those tags stay the same. So it's what I like to call static data. It never changes. Once we've done it, it's done, and it's going to stay like that forever. Dynamic data is basically when you look at what then happens, and you make decisions based on the feedback data that you're getting. So you have to get some data back again, and then you have to update your models so that you can make a better decision tomorrow. So all of our recommendations are essentially dynamic. What you'll get recommended today is not the same as what you'll get recommended tomorrow. The models keep trying to learn from the experience that they're seeing to try to find the best possible solution. And of course, as new content comes out, as content gets older, that changes all the time. So essentially, we make dynamic decisions on what content to recommend. And then you can say that the next frontier, the next stage of this is to make real-time decisions. So actually, as the page loads, and we can see that this user's just arrived from Facebook, they're on a Samsung Galaxy 9, how can we take all of that information and there and then in real time make a more intelligent decision about what to show to people? Maybe we've just learned 10 minutes ago that there's a hurricane coming. How can we make sure that our machine learning models can react to all of those things in real time? So there's almost like three stages, from static to dynamic to real time. And the reality of where most websites in the world at the moment are is in static. And they tend to work with Bibblio and other services like us to basically start to go into the dynamic or real time space. Because of course, when you load up your Facebook newsfeed, that's a dynamic decision, right? The newsfeed is not the same for everybody, and it's not the same tomorrow as it was yesterday. So we've now, I think, as an industry, we know that making dynamic decisions produces better results. But building machine learning and AI and big data is expensive, and it takes a long time. And hence we build a product that we can offer to media companies and publishers where they can begin to achieve some of those things, but tomorrow, not 3 years from now. Good question. I would say the first thing is just to get onto someone's website. Bibblio, we live on someone else's website, right? So we have to convince them that by putting our code on your page isn't going to break, or you're not going to load up your website tomorrow and it's going to look horrible. So of course, when you first start out, it's hard to convince publishers that they should trust you because you don't have 20 case studies of other sites. It's easier now when we can come and say we work with these people and these people and these people, because people go, oh, well, okay, if it's good enough for them, it's surely good enough for me. So I would say the hardest thing I've ever done was to convince the first 10 websites to put Bibblio on their page. Every customer after that actually gets a bit easier, but that's more of a personal experience. That's the hard part, because it's hard to convince people about something new, in particular when their own job or their own sort of site is at risk. For Bibblio itself, I think it's hard to build a product where you have to try to balance actually helping publishers sort of make more money and drive their business. But also, we basically decide on a very fundamental level, we decide what content people see. We decide what world they see. So we also feel, I think, this sense of ethical responsibility of serving the right content to people, right? We could, serve Kim Kardashian content all day long, but is that the right thing to do? And so I think you run into these sort of ethical discussions too about when you make decisions on behalf of people. I think you have an ethical responsibility to try to make the right decisions. And of course, there isn't right and wrong decisions, but you have to be aware that you have a responsibility to people. So I think for us, it's trying to balance, on the one side, being a successful commercial business whose product derives results for people, but at the same time, remember that we have a responsibility to users to make sure that the content we're showing them, we've had a lot of talk on this conference about ethics and about fake news and a lot of these things. How do we make sure that the content that we're recommending to people are content that we think could make their lives better, not worse? So I think we try to balance those two things, the commercial sort of requirements of building a successful product with ethical and sort of considerations about the type of product that we would like to be. So you can say that the last 5 years, unfortunately, has more been a story of sort of how things like Instagram has won over the world, right? I mean, I landed from a plane recently and I sort of got up in my seat and around me was, 12 people scrolling on Instagram, right? So in some ways you can say the biggest challenge we have working with publishers is to try to help publishers be successful. Because actually they really feel the pressure from the likes of Facebook and Google, who's sort of taken over the world in a way, right? As one publisher said to me the other day, in a way, as publishers, they still consider each other competitors, but actually the people who've run away with all the money is Google and Facebook. So I think the reality of the web today is that it's really a battle sort of between centralization and decentralization. The original version of the internet was this idea of a decentralized place with many different people doing stuff. The reality of the internet today is really that 2 or 3 or 4 companies dominate the internet. So I think it's sort of about how we balance those two things. How, of course, those companies are not bad companies, they're great companies and they do great stuff. But at the same time, I personally believe that we're going to have a better internet and a better digital future if we also have a lot of successful independent actors. So as Bibblio, we've decided to side on the side of the independent, the people who make the content, because we think the internet will be a worse place if we don't have successful companies making good content. First of all, to actually look at their data, because often they have a lot of data, but they don't necessarily use it. So I would say, first of all, actually use data in your decision making. A lot of decisions still get made based on feelings and emotions and not necessarily data. It was a big topic of the conference today, people who work in publishers saying we're still struggling to actually make decisions in our organizations based on the data that we're seeing and not what someone thinks is right. So I think where these companies like Google and Facebook have really won over the world is by being very data-driven. Historically, that's not been the case with publishers. So there's still a bit of culture change about using data to make intelligent decisions about your future. That's definitely number one. Number two is I think publishers should not be confused about all this new technology that's coming out, AR, VR, social media channels, all this stuff. It's very easy to sort of almost be like a deer in the headlights and say, all these things, what should I do? And try to do all of them. And I think the most successful publishing businesses we see are the ones who do one thing really well. So, take someone like the Financial Times. They went behind a paywall and they said, if you want our product, it's going to cost you £20 a month, but we're going to make the best content in the world about financial journalism. And actually, they're now very successful. But everybody, I remembered 7-10 years ago, everybody else was laughing at them because they were cutting off their site from, oh, you're going to go down in traffic and you're not going to, how's that ever going to work? Because back then people were making a lot of money in advertising revenue. Now it's really the sites that have been sort of driving off advertising revenue that's actually struggling. So I think it goes to show that to choose a targeted strategy and actually stick with that strategy, you have a higher chance of being successful. I think in a way, the more publishers try to be Facebook, the more they're going to fail, because they're not going to be a better Facebook than Facebook is. So if you try to play the attention game, you have to remember you compete with everybody else who also wants attention. Netflix, YouTube, Facebook. We only have 24 hours a day. So if you just compete for entertainment, you have to compete with all of these companies. Whereas, say you make highly quality journalism within these areas, most likely you're going to be one of the only people in your country who does that. So I think actually one successful strategy can be sort of taking a focus and actually focus even more than you have in the past. So I think the only thing I would say is it's been very nice to be here today to actually hear a lot from the publishers as well themselves of how they're working on some of these things internally. I think the more examples we hear, the more examples we have from other publishers, the more we can connect people and say, actually, do you know these guys over in this organization, they're also working on that. Actually, I think we have to try to sort of help publishing as an industry. And back to my point about the real enemy is actually not your other publisher. They have the same problems as you. So if you can work together, I think you could actually both benefit. I talked earlier in my talk about how if you're a YouTuber, it's really common to just appear in someone else's video, right? Because actually I have an audience and you have an audience, and if we appear in each other's videos, we share our audience. Publishers have never done that historically. They've never actually shared their traffic with each other or their content with each other because they've seen each other as competitors or enemies. I think that's changing, and I think it should change faster than it is now. I think publishers are going to be significantly stronger together than they are alone. And I think unless you're a very large publisher, you have to think this way in the future. I think together is strong. Alone, you're likely to be bullied by a lot of people.